What I'm about to tell you sounds impossible. In the summer of 2005, 5 teenagers from a small Texas town were arrested for a crime that never happened. By the time the truth came out, their lives were already destroyed. What I'm telling you sounds like something from a twisted movie, but every word is true. This is the story of how an entire community turned against its own children, and the adults who made it all possible. Victoria Town, in Texas. It has the population of 62,000. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Where high school football games are the biggest events of the week. Where kids still ride bikes to the corner store. In 2005, 5 teenagers were living ordinary lives in this town. There was Marcus, 17 years old, captain of the basketball team. His teachers described him as respectful and hardworking. He'd already been accepted to community college for the fall. Sarah was 16, an honor roll student who volunteered at the local library every weekend. She wanted to be a teacher. Then there was Jason, 15, who worked part-time at his dad's auto shop after school. Quiet kid. Kept to himself mostly. Brittany was 14, the youngest of the group. She played clarinet in the school band and had never even gotten detention. And finally, there was Derek, 16, who just earned his driver's license. His mom worked 2 jobs to support him and his little sister. 5 regular teenagers. Different friend groups. Different grades. Most of them didn't even know each other well. But they all had one thing in common. They were about to become victims of a system that was supposed to protect them. It started on a Tuesday morning in June. School had just let out for summer vacation. Mrs. Henderson, a woman in her 60s who lived on Maple Street, called the Victoria Police Department. She was hysterical. She told them that the day before, she'd been attacked in her home by a group of teenagers. They'd broken in, she said. They'd threatened her. They'd stolen money and jewelry. She gave descriptions. 5 teenagers. Mixed group. She said they went to Victoria High School. The police took her statement seriously. Home invasions were rare in Victoria. This was big news. Detective Raymond Cole was assigned to the case. He'd been with the department for 12 years. He had a reputation. Some called him thorough. Others called him aggressive. He had one of the highest conviction rates in the county. What nobody knew yet was that Detective Cole was under pressure. The department had been criticized recently for low arrest rates. The local newspaper had run articles questioning police effectiveness. Cole needed a win. He needed it badly. Within 48 hours, all 5 teenagers were brought in for questioning. Marcus was pulled from basketball practice. Sarah was taken from the library. Jason's dad brought him involuntarily when police showed up at the auto shop. Brittany was picked up from her home. Derek was stopped while driving. None of them were read their rights immediately. None of them had lawyers present. None of them understood what was happening. Detective Cole interviewed each teenager separately. The interrogation rooms at Victoria Police Department were small, windowless, painted gray. Each teenager sat alone across from Detective Cole and another officer. The sessions lasted hours. Marcus went first. He was confused. "I don't know what you're talking about," he kept saying. "I was at practice Monday. Coach will tell you." But Detective Cole didn't check with the coach. Instead, he used a technique called the Reed technique. It's a psychological interrogation method used across America. Sometimes it gets confessions. Sometimes those confessions are false. "Marcus, we know you were there," Cole said, leaning forward. "Mrs. Henderson identified you. We have witnesses. Your friends are already talking. They're saying you planned the whole thing." None of this was true. "If you cooperate now, things will be easier for you," Cole continued. "But if you make us prove everything, the judge will throw the book at you. You're 17. You could be tried as an adult. That's serious prison time." Marcus was terrified. He'd never been in trouble before. He didn't know his rights. He thought if he just explained clearly enough, they'd understand it was a mistake. "I wasn't there," he said again. "I don't even know where Maple Street is." The interrogation went on for 6 hours. Sarah's interrogation was even worse. She cried through most of it. She asked for her parents multiple times. Detective Cole told her she didn't need her parents, she just needed to tell the truth. "Sarah, we've arrested the others already." Cole lied. "They're saying you were the lookout. That you watched while they went inside." "Is that what happened? Were you just the lookout?" "No. I wasn't anywhere near there." "Then where were you Monday afternoon?" "I was home. Reading." "Anyone see you?" "My mom was at work." "I was alone." No alibi. In Detective Cole's mind, that meant opportunity. By the time Sarah left that interrogation room, she was shaking. She couldn't understand why nobody believed her. Jason broke first. After 8 hours of questioning, exhausted and scared, The 15-year-old finally said what Detective Cole wanted to hear. "Okay, yes, I was there." Cole leaned back, satisfied. "Tell me what happened." We went to the house. We knocked on the door. Then what?" Jason was making it up as he went, trying to say whatever would let him leave. "We went inside." "Who went inside?" "All of us." "Say their names." And that's how Jason named the other 4. Because it was true. But because after 8 hours, he would have said anything to make it stop. Within days, police claimed they had confessions from 3 of the 5 teenagers. Jason, Marcus, and Derek had all eventually admitted to being involved, though their stories contradicted each other completely. Sarah and Brittany never confessed. But it didn't matter. They were arrested anyway. Here's what should have happened next: a thorough investigation. Here's what actually happened: nothing. Detective Cole didn't collect forensic evidence from Mrs. Henderson's home. No fingerprints were taken. No DNA samples. No security camera footage was reviewed, even though 2 neighboring houses had cameras. He didn't verify the teenagers' alibis. Marcus's basketball coach was never contacted. Jason's father had time cards showing Jason was at work. They were never examined. The stolen items Mrs. Henderson described, jewelry and cash, were never recovered. Police never searched the teenagers' homes for the stolen property. Most shocking of all, Detective Cole never created a proper photo lineup for Mrs. Henderson to identify her attackers. He simply showed her the teenagers' school photos and asked, "Are these the ones?" In proper police procedure, witnesses are shown multiple photos, and the photos are presented in a neutral way. This prevents false identifications. But Cole didn't follow procedure. Mrs. Henderson, traumatized and scared, looked at the photos and said yes. Later, she would admit she wasn't entirely certain. But by then, it was too late. Word spread fast in a small town. By the weekend, everyone in Victoria knew that 5 teenagers had been arrested for attacking an elderly woman in her home. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page. 5 teens arrested in brutal home invasion. The article included the teenagers' names and photos. It didn't mention that they were claiming innocence. It didn't mention the lack of physical evidence. It certainly didn't mention the questionable interrogation tactics. The community's reaction was swift and brutal. Someone spray-painted "criminals" on Sarah's family's garage. Brittany's mother was told not to come back to her church. Anonymous callers threatened Marcus's family. Derek's mom lost her job when her employer said they couldn't have the mother of a criminal working there. The teenagers couldn't go anywhere without people staring, whispering, pointing. Their friends stopped calling. Teachers who'd once praised them now looked at them with suspicion and disgust. Victoria had already decided they were guilty. The trial was just a formality. 8 months later, the case went to trial. The teenagers' families had scraped together money for lawyers, but none of them could afford experienced criminal defense attorneys. They got court-appointed lawyers who were overworked and underpaid. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Ross, presented what seemed like a strong case to the jury. They had Mrs. Henderson's testimony. She took the stand, elderly and sympathetic, and pointed to each teenager. "Those are the ones who attacked me," she said. They had the confessions from Jason, Marcus, and Derek. The defense argued these were coerced, but the judge allowed them as evidence anyway. They had Detective Cole's testimony about the investigation. What they didn't have was physical evidence. The defense attorneys pointed this out repeatedly. No fingerprints. No DNA. No stolen items recovered. No security footage. No verified timeline. But the prosecution had an answer. These teenagers are smart. They wore gloves. They knew what they were doing. The defense presented alibis. Marcus's basketball coach testified he was at practice. Jason's time cards from work showed he clocked in that afternoon. Sarah's neighbor testified she'd seen Sarah's bike in the driveway all day. But the prosecution had an answer for this too. Witnesses can be mistaken. Time cards can be falsified. But Mrs. Henderson knows what she saw. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, they read the verdict: guilty. All 5 teenagers. Guilty of burglary, assault, and theft. In the courtroom, the teenagers' mothers sobbed. Marcus stared straight ahead in shock. Sarah collapsed. Brittany, just 14 years old, whispered, "But we didn't do it." Judge Patricia Morrison delivered the sentences. Marcus, tried as an adult, 10 years in state prison. Derek, 8 years. Jason, 6 years in juvenile detention, to be transferred to adult prison when he turned 18. Sarah, 5 years in juvenile detention. Brittany, 4 years in juvenile detention. 5 teenagers. Combined, 43 years of their lives taken away. For a crime that, as it would turn out, never happened the way Mrs. Henderson described. Prison changes people. especially when those people are innocent teenagers. Marcus entered the state prison system at 18 years old. He was placed in general population with adult criminals, some convicted of violent crimes. He had to learn quickly how to survive. Within the first month, he was assaulted by another inmate. He suffered a broken rib and facial injuries. Guards said he'd started the fight, though multiple inmates said that wasn't true. He spent 2 weeks in solitary confinement as punishment. In letters to his family, Marcus wrote, "I don't recognize myself anymore. I'm becoming someone I hate, just to survive." Derek had it even worse. He struggled with depression before prison. Behind bars, it became severe. He attempted suicide twice in his first year. The prison's mental health resources were almost non-existent. Jason, Sarah, and Brittany were in juvenile facilities, which were supposed to be different. But juvenile detention is still prison for kids. They were locked in cells. They followed strict schedules. They were surrounded by kids who'd committed actual crimes. Sarah stopped writing letters after the first year. Her mother visited every month and watched her daughter disappear a little more with each visit. "It's like she's shutting down," Sarah's mother told reporters later. "Like she's giving up." Brittany, the youngest, was released first after serving 3 years. She was 17 when she got out. She'd entered at 14, a child who played clarinet. She came out unable to trust anyone, unable to sleep without nightmares, unable to believe in justice. The family suffered too. Marcus's mother lost her home. The legal fees and the loss of Marcus's part-time income contribution meant she couldn't keep up with mortgage payments. She moved into a small apartment. She worked extra shifts but could barely afford to collect calls from prison, which cost up to $15 for a 15-minute conversation. Derek's mom's health deteriorated. The stress of having her son in prison, combined with losing her job, led to a heart attack. She survived, but the medical bills buried her in debt. Sarah's parents divorced. Her father blamed himself for not being able to afford better lawyers. The guilt consumed him. He left one night and never came back. Jason's dad closed his auto shop. He couldn't focus on work knowing his son was locked up. He spent every day trying to find someone who would listen, who would investigate the case again, who would see that something was wrong. Brittany's mother became an activist, though she didn't mean to. They tracked down witnesses who were never interviewed. Jason's coworkers confirmed he'd been at work. Sarah's neighbor was willing to testify again, more forcefully this time, that Sarah had been home all afternoon. They brought in forensic experts who examined Mrs. Henderson's home. Even years later, they found evidence, a partial fingerprint on a window frame that didn't match any of the 5 teenagers. They analyzed the interrogation tapes, which Detective Cole had been required to record. The footage showed the psychological pressure, the lies about evidence, the way Cole had manipulated scared kids into saying what he wanted. Most damning of all, they discovered that Detective Cole had received 2 other reports of home invasions in the weeks before Mrs. Henderson's call. Both victims described adult men in their 30s, not teenagers. Cole had never connected these cases or considered that the same perpetrators might be responsible for Mrs. Henderson's break-in. Why not? Because he'd already decided the 5 teenagers were guilty. The Innocence Project filed a motion for a new trial. The Victoria District Attorney's Office fought back hard. District Attorney Michael Ross, who'd prosecuted the original case, argued that the convictions should stand. He said the new evidence was inconclusive. He said Mrs. Henderson's deathbed doubts were just the confused thoughts of a dying woman. He said the teenagers had already been convicted by a jury, and that verdict should be respected. Behind the scenes, there was another reason for the resistance. Admitting these convictions were wrong would open the door to lawsuits, public outrage, and scrutiny of every other case Detective Cole and DA Ross had worked on. It was about protecting reputations and avoiding accountability. But the Innocence Project lawyers were relentless. They held press conferences. They contacted national news outlets. They showed the evidence to anyone who would look. Slowly, the narrative began to change. A journalist from a major newspaper did a deep dive investigation. The article, titled, "The Town That Framed Its Own Children," went viral. It was shared millions of times on social media. Suddenly, Victoria, Texas, wasn't a quiet small town anymore. It was a symbol of everything wrong with the American justice system. Public pressure mounted. Civil rights organizations got involved. Protests were held outside the Victoria courthouse. Finally, 18 months after the Innocence Project took the case, a judge agreed to review the convictions. In 2009, 4 years after their arrest, the 5 teenagers were exonerated. The judge vacated all convictions. He ruled that the original investigation had been fundamentally flawed, the interrogations had been coercive, and the new evidence created reasonable doubt. Marcus, Derek, Jason, Sarah, and Brittany were free. But freedom didn't mean everything was okay. Marcus had served 4 years in prison. He was 21 years old, but he looked older. Prison had aged him. He had scars, physical and mental. The boy who'd been captain of the basketball team, who dreamed of college, was gone. He had a felony record that would take months to clear. He had no job skills, no recent education, no references. He moved back in with his mother and struggled to find work. Derek was released from prison with severe PTSD. He couldn't sleep without nightmares. He couldn't be in crowds. The depression he'd struggled with in prison didn't go away just because he was free. He spent a year in intensive therapy. Jason was 19 when he got out. He'd spent his entire teenage years locked up. He'd never been to a high school dance, never had a girlfriend, never learned to drive. He had to learn how to exist in the world. Sarah never went back to school. She dreamed of being a teacher, but she couldn't imagine standing in front of a classroom now. She worked retail jobs and tried to avoid talking to people about those 4 years. Brittany, released at 17, tried to go back to high school to finish her senior year. But the other students whispered about her. Teachers didn't know how to act around her. She dropped out after 3 months and got her GED instead. They were free, but their lives had been stolen. What happened to the people responsible? Detective Raymond Cole was investigated by Internal Affairs. They found he'd used questionable interrogation tactics in multiple cases. But he wasn't fired. He wasn't even suspended. He was given a written warning and additional training. 2 years later, he retired with full pension. District Attorney Michael Ross faced criticism but no formal discipline. He released a statement saying he prosecuted the case in good faith based on the evidence available at the time. He expressed sympathy for the teenagers but didn't apologize. He ran for re-election and won. Judge Patricia Morrison, who'd sentenced 5 innocent teenagers to a combined 43 years in prison, expressed regret but faced no consequences. She remained on the bench until her retirement in 2015. Mrs. Henderson died before the exoneration. She never had to face the teenagers or their families. She never had to answer for what her uncertain testimony had done. The 5 teenagers sued the City of Victoria, Detective Cole, and the District Attorney's Office for wrongful conviction and civil rights violations. The case took years to settle. Eventually, each of them received compensation. The amounts varied. Marcus got the most because he'd served the longest, about $300,000. Brittany got the least, about $80,000. It sounds like a lot of money. But break it down by the years they lost, and Marcus received about $75,000 per year of prison. Derek got about $60,000 per year. How much is a year of your life worth? How much is your teenage years worth? How much is your innocence worth? No amount of money could give them back what was taken. The Victoria 5, as they came to be known, are not unique. According to the National Registry of Exonerations, there have been over 3,500 exonerations in the United States since 1989. That's 3,500 people who were convicted of crimes they didn't commit. Many were convicted based on false confessions, just like Marcus, Derek, and Jason. Studies show that false confessions are present in about 29% of wrongful conviction cases. Many were convicted based on eyewitness misidentification. Just like Mrs. Henderson's testimony. Research shows that eyewitness testimony is often unreliable, especially when the witness is traumatized or under pressure. Many were convicted because of police misconduct or inadequate defense attorneys. The average person who is wrongfully convicted spends about 14 years in prison before being exonerated. 14 years of life gone. And those are just the cases we know about. How many people are currently in prison right now for crimes they didn't commit? How many cases were never investigated thoroughly? How many interrogations were coercive? How many alibis were never checked? We'll never know the real number, but experts estimate it could be in the tens of thousands. The system that's supposed to protect us sometimes destroys innocent lives instead. Today, the Victoria 5 are scattered across the country. Marcus moved to California. He went back to school, finally getting the college education he dreamed of as a teenager. He's now a social worker, helping at-risk youth. He says if his experience can help prevent even one kid from going through what he did, it was worth sharing his story. Derek still lives in Texas, but not in Victoria. He'll never go back to that town. He works in construction and sees a therapist twice a month. He's doing better, he says, but there are still hard days. Jason became an advocate for criminal justice reform. He speaks at conferences and schools, telling his story. He wants people to understand how easy it is for the system to fail. Sarah lives a quiet life in Oregon. She didn't want to be in the spotlight. She just wanted peace. She works at a bookstore and volunteers at an animal shelter. She's slowly learning to trust again. Brittany became a paralegal. She works for a defense attorney, helping people accused of crimes. She says every defendant deserves someone who believes they might be innocent, because she was innocent and nobody believed her. They're survivors. They rebuilt their lives from nothing, but they'll carry the scars forever. The story of the Victoria 5 asks us to confront uncomfortable truths. It asks us to question our faith in the justice system. To remember that police and prosecutors and judges are human, and humans make mistakes. Sometimes those mistakes are innocent. Sometimes they're not. It asks us to remember that innocent until proven guilty is supposed to be more than just words. It's supposed to be a promise we make to each other as a society. It asks us to think about the teenagers we pass on the street, the young people we see in courtrooms, the names we read in newspapers. To remember that they're human beings, not statistics. That their lives matter. Most importantly, it asks us to care. Because the Victoria 5 were failed by adults who were supposed to protect them. They were failed by a detective who cared more about his conviction rate than the truth. They were failed by a prosecutor who cared more about winning than justice. They were failed by a community that was too quick to judge and too slow to question. They were failed by a system that prioritizes efficiency over accuracy, that treats confessions as reliable even when they're coerced. That allows wrongful convictions to happen and then makes it nearly impossible to undo them. And they're not alone. Somewhere in America right now, there's another teenager being interrogated without a lawyer. Another coerced confession being recorded. Another innocent person being sent to prison. Another life being destroyed by a system that's supposed to protect us. The Victoria 5 got their freedom eventually. They got their exoneration. They got some measure of justice. But many people never do. So what can we do? We can demand better. We can support organizations like the Innocence Project that fight for the wrongfully convicted. We can advocate for reform's mandatory recording of all interrogations. Better protections for juveniles, stricter rules about eyewitness testimony, consequences for prosecutors and police who break the rules. We can remember that being tough on crime doesn't mean being careless with evidence. That justice means getting it right, not just getting a conviction. We can teach young people their rights. We can tell them, if you're ever questioned by police, ask for a lawyer. Don't let anyone pressure you into confessing to something you didn't do. It's not being difficult or uncooperative. It's protecting yourself. We can question our own biases. When we hear about a crime on the news, can we resist the urge to assume guilt before all the facts are known? Can we remember that an accusation is not the same as proof? We can be better than Victoria, Texas, was in 2005. Because here's the truth, this could happen anywhere. It could happen in your town. It could happen to someone you know. It could happen to you. The Victoria 5 spent years fighting to be heard, fighting to be believed, fighting for a justice system that had already failed them. They won, but they lost so much along the way. Let their story be a reminder. Let it be a warning. Let it be a call to do better. Because 5 teenagers walked into police interrogation rooms as innocent people in 2005. And when they walked out, everything had changed. If you found this story important, share it. Talk about it. Don't let cases like this be forgotten. Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's about protecting the innocent. And right now, our system isn't doing enough of that. The Victoria 5 are free now, but they're still fighting. Fighting for reform. Fighting for awareness. Fighting to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Their fight isn't over. And neither is ours.